Story 1, The Oklahoma Ritual. This transpired when I was in my early 20s, residing in south-central Oklahoma on the periphery of a diminutive town named Duncan. I was assisting a companion in rounding up livestock that had escaped after someone plowed their vehicle through a fence at a T-intersection. The impact had violently uprooted two posts, leaving a gaping 30-foot chasm for the cattle to wander through. While we had recovered the bulk of the herd, 3 or 4 animals remained unaccounted for. So there we were, at the witching hour of 1 a.m., carving through the darkness on dirt bikes, desperate to locate them before one was struck by a vehicle, inciting a lawsuit against his father. My friend, James, and I ventured east, while our other helpers split off to the north and south. It's crucial to understand the topography of Oklahoma. It's a vast quilt of farmland, dedicated either to crops or grazing. The land is predominantly partitioned into 1-mile square sections. Consequently, the roads form a rigid grid, running cardinally and intersecting at 1-mile intervals. The population in this region was sparse, with homes few and far between. We were uncertain how long the fence had been breached. My friend's father only noticed the discrepancy when he realized livestock were missing. His property encompassed an entire section plus a large part of an adjacent one. The opening was on the easternmost boundary of their land, the furthest point from their house. They patrolled the perimeter weekly, so the damage was no more than a couple of days old. James and I tore down those ancient, dust-choked roads, our battery-powered spotlight slicing through the oppressive blackness. At each of the innumerable small wooden bridges, we would pause, searching for any sign of the cows near the water. Our strategy was to push 10 miles out and then meticulously work our way back, covering the entire 10 by 10 grid. We'd been at this since dusk, around 9 p.m. We were traveling east when we reached an intersection on a tract of land that had belonged to a farmer who had long since passed away. His heirs, uninterested in agriculture, had put the property on the market where it had languished for years, unused and untended. The roads here were seldom traveled, and nature was aggressively reclaiming them, with dense overgrowth making passage treacherous. After navigating south, we turned east again and immediately saw a flicker of light over a distant hill. Believing it to be a grass fire, a terrifying prospect in this dry, dead landscape, we accelerated. Cresting the hill, we saw the blaze was not in a field, but planted squarely in the middle of the road. As we drew closer, the object resolved into a grotesque, impossible sight, a lazy-boy-style recliner, fully engulfed in writhing flames. After extinguishing the bizarre pyre with dirt, we idled past it, profoundly unsettled. Just 100 feet down the road, at the bottom of the next incline, we found one of the missing cows. It lay half-sprawled on the road, its throat savagely slashed open, its dead eyes staring into the void. A cold dread began to prickle my skin. James pointed out a trail of blood that led away from the carcass, punctuated by 3 distinct sets of bloody shoe prints. The hair on my neck stood on end, the air felt unnaturally cold. I saw my own terror reflected in James's wide, saucer-like eyes. We considered fleeing, but the thought of his father's scorn pushed us to investigate further. We walked our bikes silently toward the end of the road, wary of an ambush. As we ascended the next hill, a new, disturbing detail emerged. Someone had methodically affixed paper plates to the top strand of the barbed wire fence lining both sides of the road. They were spaced evenly, about 5 feet apart, stretching up and over the crest of the hill. Following the bizarre trail with our eyes, James suddenly whispered, "Look, another fire." At that moment, a strange, acrid smell hit me, not wood smoke, but something cloying, like incense had been added to the blaze. My resolve crumbled. This was too much. The slaughtered cow, the burning chair, the ritualistic plates, this was the work of multiple deranged individuals, and I had no desire to become a footnote in a true crime story. James agreed, but insisted we see the source of the second fire before we retreated. At the summit, a paper plate dislodged and skittered behind us, making us both flinch. James silenced my nervous laughter and gestured for me to listen. Below us, a group of about 10 figures stood with their backs to us, encircling another burning recliner. They were passing around a large pitcher, each taking a mouthful of its contents and spitting it into the flames. All the while, they chanted in a rhythmic, monotonous drone, with specific emphasis on certain words I couldn't fully discern, though I caught fragments like, beseech, and, father. We stood frozen, paralyzed by the horrific spectacle. One of the men turned toward a small table, and as he did, he spotted us, perfect silhouettes against the night sky. He shouted, and the entire group spun around and began charging up the hill toward us. That shattered our trance. James's bike started on the first kick, but in my panic, I lost my balance and went down with mine. My breath came in ragged, terrified gasps as I struggled to right the bike, stalling it again. Finally, I pushed it down the hill, jumped on, and popped the clutch, the engine roaring to life. We raced back to his house at a reckless speed. His father, Buster, listened to our frantic story, then gathered several friends and a formidable arsenal of weapons. As we guided them back to the site, Buster peppered us with questions, the most troubling of which was what vehicles the people were driving. We realized with a jolt that we hadn't seen any. When we arrived, the scene was horrifyingly altered. The first recliner was gone from the road, its charred remains tossed in a ditch. The cow's carcass had also been dragged into the ditch on the opposite side. The paper plates had vanished without a trace. At the second location, the fire was extinguished and meticulously covered with dirt. The table, the pitcher, the people, all gone. When we returned again at daylight with the sheriff, the cow and the first recliner had disappeared completely. The only remaining evidence was the scorched earth and the stains of blood on the road. The deputies found a trail where the grass had been trampled, leading over the fence and across a creek, where they discovered a woman's tennis shoe and a piece of red material caught on a barb. On the next road over, tire marks indicated a hasty departure. They also found a shard of glass with blood on it. A few days later, the sheriff delivered the final, chilling piece of the puzzle. The blood on the glass was not from the cow. It was human. Story 2, the Kelly Road Encounter. This occurred just a few months ago, and the memory still disturbs my thoughts. My name is Caleb, I'm a junior at Brooklyn University, though my origins are in Ohio, Pennsylvania. I often drive back to my home state for the holidays late at night to avoid traffic. This particular event unfolded during my trip home for spring break. It was roughly 3 a.m. and I was navigating along Kelly Road, a stretch of pavement near Ohioville notorious for local legends of hauntings and cult activities. I had always dismissed these as provincial folklore, mere tourist bait. Until that night. Fatigued but determined, I drove with the windows slightly open and the music low, trying to stay alert. My eyes caught a plume of smoke ascending from the woods to my right. My initial thought was a house fire, and a sense of duty compelled me to investigate. I pulled my car onto a dirt patch beside the road. The moment I stepped out, an oppressive, heavy atmosphere enveloped me, a palpable feeling that my presence was unwelcome. Despite this, I moved toward the smoke, using my phone's flashlight to pierce the gloom. That's when the chanting began. At first, I brushed it off as a trick of my exhausted mind. But as I ventured deeper, the sound grew undeniable, a chorus of low voices, synchronized in a language I could not comprehend. I finally peered through a thicket of trees, and a wave of nausea washed over me. There, in a clearing, stood 10 to 15 figures cloaked in dark robes, gathered in a circle around a bonfire. To my horror, they were casting animal carcasses into the flames. I distinctly recognized the form of a goat and another creature, perhaps a sheep, being consumed by the fire. The sickening stench of burning fur assaulted my senses, and I gagged. Suddenly, one of the robed figures turned its head and its gaze locked directly with mine. A primal instinct screamed at me to flee. I broke into a desperate sprint, only to trip over a large branch, my head striking the ground hard. As I scrambled to my feet, my ears ringing, I was struck by a new horror: the chanting had ceased. The ensuing silence was more terrifying than the ritual itself, for I knew it meant they were now hunting me. I bolted back toward my car, not daring to look back, fumbling frantically with my keys. I could hear the crashing of footsteps through the underbrush, but the darkness concealed my pursuers. I threw myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and slammed my foot on the accelerator. In the fleeting sweep of my headlights, I caught a glimpse of two of them at the tree line, standing motionless in their robes, watching me escape. Here is the part that continues to haunt me. After several minutes of driving at a frantic pace, I slowed down and glanced in my rearview mirror. Faint headlights were visible in the distance. Initially, I assumed it was another vehicle, but they neither gained on me nor fell behind. They simply maintained a fixed distance, a ghostly presence tethered to me no matter my speed. Panic surged as I searched my pockets for my phone to call for help, only to realize with dawning horror that I must have dropped it in the woods when I fell. As I glanced back in the mirror, the headlights, which had been steadily behind me, abruptly vanished. They didn't turn off, they were simply gone. Simultaneously, my radio erupted in a cacophony of static, and the ghastly smell of burning fur flooded the car's interior. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station nearly 30 minutes later. I sat trembling in the parking lot, my eyes glued to the dark woods across the street, half expecting a robed figure to emerge. The next day, after purchasing a new phone, I returned home. On my welcome mat sat my old, mud-caked phone. Next to it lay a single, severed goat horn. From now on, I will always take the long way around. I would rather waste gallons of gas than ever set foot on Kelly Road again. You are correct. I apologize for the incomplete response. I will now rewrite the remaining 7 stories, adhering to the same strict guidelines, a 70% lexical transformation, intensified horror, and the preservation of the original plot and length. Here are the rewritten versions of the remaining stories. Story 3, The Doctor's Request. This experience dates back to when I was merely 4 years old, so my memory of it is fragmented. My mother later recounted the full story to me when I was old enough to comprehend it. During my early childhood, a visit to my aunt's house resulted in a hypersensitive reaction to her dog, which manifested as a severe rash that spread to my private areas. My mother took me to a dermatologist in Allentown, a specialist recommended by friends. My mother, being a physician herself, researched his credentials and found his reputation to be seemingly impeccable at the time. I retain faint, unsettling flashes of the appointment. The doctor examined the rash, dismissed it as a common condition not worthy of concern, and prescribed a steroid cream. Then, his demeanor shifted slightly. He asked my mother for permission to photograph the rash, citing the need to document it for research purposes. My mother, understanding the value of case studies for medical advancement, initially considered it. However, an instinctual alarm began to sound in her mind. Had this been a rare or unusual affliction, the request might have been justifiable. But the doctor himself had just labeled it a common condition. This glaring contradiction was the red flag. She knew that extensive research on such a common ailment already existed. A photograph of my rash was utterly superfluous. She firmly declined his request, and we left. The incident was forgotten until, some time later, his face materialized on the television screen during a news broadcast. Dr. Robert J. Thompson had been arrested by the FBI. He was indicted for the possession of over 200 sexually explicit photographs of children, discovered on his home computers. A monster had been hiding in plain sight, and only my mother's sharp intuition had protected me from becoming another one of his case studies. Story 4, The Sound in the Woods. Last summer, my boyfriend and I ventured into a nature preserve in rural Pennsylvania for a primitive camping trip. The place was desolate. We encountered only 2 other individuals in the entire expanse. My boyfriend felt immediately that they both radiated a disquieting energy. The first was a woman whose truck was parked off the trail, put agape, in a manner that seemed staged, as if she were baiting someone to stop and offer assistance. The second was a man who drove his vehicle past our campsite repeatedly as we were setting up, his pace unnervingly slow, his gaze fixed upon us. Whether those two were connected to what followed remains a mystery, but the true terror began around 3 a.m. We were ripped from sleep by a deafening, abrupt concussion of sound. It was an unearthly noise, impossible to categorize. My boyfriend described it as akin to the grinding shriek of industrial machinery or a colossal tool dragging across stone. He shot up, peering through the tent's thin window into the oppressive dark. The sound erupted again, and then again, its approach terrifyingly apparent with each recurrence. I was paralyzed with fear, but my boyfriend, trying to calm me, insisted it was probably miles away. He confessed to me later this was a lie. He said the sound felt as though it was emanating from just beyond the dirt road, at one point suspecting it was directly in front of our campsite. He held back from making us flee to the car, fearing it might be a trap designed to lure us out of the tent. Eventually, the horrifying noise ceased. After 20 minutes of tense silence, we decided to abandon the site. He gripped our only weapon, a machete, as we packed under the cold light of a full moon. That's when I saw it. Near the dead embers of our campfire lay a solitary, glinting aluminum beer can. It hadn't been there when we went to sleep, and neither of us had brought any beer. A silent intruder had been there, watching us. We got out of there without looking back, and for the remainder of our trip, we sought refuge in either heavily populated campsites or cheap hotel rooms. Story 5, The Trespasser in the Snow. I am an avid hunter, and during the second week of rifle season in late November, I was desperate to bag a deer. I typically rise around 5 a.m. to drive to my hunting spot on private land owned by my grandfather. The weather that morning was atrocious. A blizzard was raging, with heavy snow and powerful winds. Knowing my grandfather's aversion to such conditions, I went alone. The drive was treacherous, and by the time I arrived, the pre-dawn light was being suffocated by the gloomy, overcast sky. Almost immediately after reaching my spot, a familiar perch about 100 yards behind my grandfather's house, I became aware of movement all around me in the pitch-dark woods. I dismissed it as wildlife. Soon after, however, I heard the distinct sound of something bipedal walking just over the ridge to my right. My first assumption was my grandfather, but the lights in his house were dark. It had to be another hunter, trespassing illegally. To signal my presence, I flashed my light several times in that direction. The footsteps stopped. An hour passed as the world slowly gained a dim, gray visibility through the storm. It was then that I noticed an anomalous shape protruding from a cluster of trees near where I'd heard the noise. It looked like a mound of earth, but it was clinging to the side of a tree. I raised my rifle, using the scope to get a closer look. The chilling realization coalesced in my mind. I was looking at the sleeve of an old-style camouflage coat. It was a person, concealed and motionless. They wore no blaze orange, a legal requirement. Debating my next move, I decided to call my grandfather, keeping my eyes fixed on the figure. He answered and confirmed he was on his way. I then whistled sharply at the trespasser, to let him know he'd been seen. He didn't react. After a few minutes, my patience wore thin, and I began walking toward him. He was nestled between a shrub and two trees, seemingly asleep. I whistled again, much louder this time. He jolted awake, frantically trying to hide his exposed coat. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s, with a foul, matted beard and a gray hat. But what chilled me to the bone was the realization that from his concealed position, he had a perfect, unobstructed view of my grandfather's house. His intent became terrifyingly clear. Once he saw me, a 6 feet 5 inches man with a hunting rifle less than 30 feet away, the color drained from his face. He stammered out a fabricated story about getting lost. The thought of what this man could have done to my grandfather ignited a cold fury in me. When my granddad arrived, we escorted the man down to the road and called the authorities. While he was only charged with trespassing and stalking, I can't shake the image of him lying in wait, a predator concealed by the snow, watching and waiting. Story 6, The Raystown Encounter. In the summer of 2006, after my first year of college, I returned to my hometown in Pennsylvania. A few childhood friends and I decided to finally undertake a quest we talked about for years, to find the Raystown Ray, a legendary lake monster said to inhabit the massive, deep waters of Raystown Lake. After a night of celebratory indulgence, our numbers dwindled, but myself and 3 friends, Eddie, Jay, and Ben, pushed forward. We spent hours paddling kayaks around a secluded cove with no success. Our backup plan was to camp in the James Creek area. Jay and I set up the tents while Ben, the group's hothead, and Eddie went to gather firewood. About 20 minutes in, we heard a loud crack from the woods behind us, like a heavy branch being snapped. We dismissed it as Ben's usual antics. When they returned, Ben wore a self-satisfied grin and cryptically announced, "You guys are not going to believe what I saw out there." He refused to elaborate, saving it for the campfire. Later that night, around 11 p.m. the woods fell into an unnaturally profound silence. As we sat around the fire, a tangible wave of heat, entirely separate from the campfire, washed over us from our right. It felt like opening a hot oven. The silence and darkness suddenly felt menacing. Ben then revealed what he'd seen, trees marked with crude stick figure carvings. He claimed they depicted gruesome death scenes, bodies contorted at unnatural angles, dismembered, and hung upside down. Even Eddie looked unsettled. Just as our nerves began to fray, we heard footsteps approaching from the denser part of the woods. Ben, ever the provocateur, grabbed a flashlight and plunged into the trees toward the sound. We watched his light bobbing in the darkness until it suddenly winked out, as if the batteries had died. After a few agonizingly long seconds, it reappeared, moving purposefully back toward us. When Ben emerged from the tree line, his face was several shades paler, though he tried to mask his fear, claiming he'd simply dropped the flashlight. We retreated to our tents, leaving the fire blazing. Lying in the dark, tense and feigning sleep, a new sound began. It was a distinct sniffing noise, like a large animal testing the air, and it came from just outside my tent. A moment later, the same sound echoed from above Ben and Eddie's tent, as if 2 unseen creatures were communicating in the darkness with these strange, guttural inhalations. I don't know how long it continued before I passed out from sheer terror and exhaustion. At sunrise, we broke camp in record time, all of us nervously glancing up into the tall oaks. We had gone looking for a monster in the lake and found something far more terrifying lurking in the trees. Story 7, The Voice in the House. This happened shortly after my 15th birthday in 2007. My mother was away on a business trip, and due to her paranoia about me being alone, I was required to stay with a friend across the street. On the last night, around 11 p.m., my friend and I were in her room, bored. Her parents were out. We decided to leave a prank message on my home answering machine for my mom to find in the morning. We dialed my home number and put it on speakerphone, giggling as we waited for the beep. It usually took 5 rings. On the 3rd ring, the line clicked. Someone picked up. "Hello." The voice was a low, gravelly rasp, like a man who had smoked for 40 years. But beneath the rasp was a chilling malice, a cold, dangerous quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. I glanced at my friend. Her face was a mask of pale terror. Neither of us could speak. "Hello," the voice repeated. I tried to form words, to demand who was in my house, but the man spoke again, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You shouldn't have called." There was a loud slam, and the line went dead. Panic erupted. We frantically checked the call log. It was the correct number. A man was in my house. We sprinted through my friend's home, locking every door and window while hysterically explaining the situation to her parents over the phone. They were 15 minutes away and called the police. For 10 agonizing minutes, we huddled under her bed, jumping at every creak of the house. The police arrived to find my front door wide open. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to be stolen, but the wall-mounted phone in the kitchen was hanging off its hook, the base cracked as if the receiver had been slammed down with immense force. In my room and my mother's room, drawers had been opened and their contents rifled through. They never found the intruder. What I never told anyone was that earlier that day, I had gone back to my house to retrieve a notebook. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit with an overwhelming sense of wrongness. The silence in the house was heavy, suffocating. A primal fear gripped me, and I couldn't force myself to walk more than a few steps past the entryway. I locked the door and fled back across the street, feeling foolish. Looking back now, I wasn't being a wimp. My instincts were screaming at me. That man was already in the house, hiding, waiting. Story 8, The 4 a.m. Caller. This ordeal began during my senior year of high school in 2008. I was jolted awake late one night by my phone ringing. The clock read 4 a.m. The caller ID was a private number. Assuming it was a robocall, I ignored it and went back to sleep. This became a recurring event, the calls growing more frequent. By my freshman year of college, they were happening almost every night, always around 4 a.m. It was deliberate. If I didn't answer, they would call back 3 or 4 times in succession. One night, furious and sleep-deprived, I finally answered. "Hello. Who is this?" Silence. "Please stop calling me." I then heard a low, menacing laugh, followed by a stream of incoherent, threatening-sounding rambling. A gut feeling told me this was someone I never wanted to encounter. I hung up, my heart pounding. For months, the calls continued. I began turning my phone off at night just to get some rest, my paranoia growing daily. During Christmas break, I was home in Memphis when the private number called again, this time around 8 a.m. I answered, ready to unleash my frustration. "Who the hell is this? Leave me alone." A deep, male voice responded with chilling clarity, "Are you going to meet me?" Shocked, I stammered, No, I don't know you." The voice that replied was the coldest I had ever heard. "I know where you live. I'll be there soon." Absolute terror seized me. I ran to my parents' room, sobbing as I explained the situation. My father, a military man, immediately retrieved a firearm and began watching the street for any unfamiliar vehicles. I was too petrified to sleep. After that day, the calls inexplicably stopped. I never got another one. I'm left to wonder who he was. Was he a stalker who finally gave up? Or was it a case of wrong number, and he thought he was calling some other person, someone he was on his way to visit with terrible intentions? The sudden, complete silence is almost as disturbing as the calls themselves. Story 9, The Hospital Predator. 2 years ago, when I was 14, I was admitted to a psychiatric facility to deal with severe depression. 3 days into my stay, I awoke with a terrible stomach ache and was permitted by the nurses to remain in my room while the other patients attended activities. Alone in the quiet ward, my room's phone began to ring. I answered, expecting to hear my boyfriend or parents, but was met with the voice of an unfamiliar man. He asked for Sandra. I informed him there was no one by that name here. His voice sounded eerily similar to my friend's father, whom I had just met during visiting hours the previous night. Mistaking him for this man, I gave him my name. His questions immediately turned invasive. "So, what are you in there for?" When I told him it was personal, he pressed on. "Did you fight to get in there, beating up other girls?" A cold unease crept over me. I quickly realized there was no patient named Sandra in the facility. I ended the deeply uncomfortable conversation. Later, during visiting hours, another call came for me. The man on the line claimed to be my father. This was impossible. My actual father was sitting right beside me at that very moment. My dad, enraged, took the phone and demanded to know who was calling, but the man immediately hung up. After several more calls came in asking for me by name, the hospital staff became alarmed and suspended all incoming phone privileges for the patients. The truth they revealed was horrifying. A convicted rapist had been systematically calling the mental hospital for years. He would cold call rooms, and if a girl answered, he would gather whatever personal information he could from the conversation. He would then use that information to call back later, posing as a trusted figure like a father or boyfriend to gain their confidence. He had even attempted to show up and pick up patients on a couple of occasions. What remains most terrifying is that to be connected to a patient's room, a caller must know their exact date of birth. This predator somehow had access to our private information, and he was using it to hunt the most vulnerable. Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos.